Alright, so this is the Volcanics deck that I played at YCS Chicago. I did pretty good, not quite as well as I would have liked. I went 4-3. I was hoping to make day 2, but unfortunately I did not. I ended up losing to 3 Nekroz players, 2 of which made top 32. Still, even though I ended up losing after 7 rounds, I feel like I did pretty good, especially considering everybody I played was really good. And the Nekroz deck is actually pretty insane. Even with the hits, that deck is still way too good. Before I get really into my video, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Gustavo for letting me borrow his copy of Volcanic Chain for the event, and also letting me borrow his Spellgrounds mat and a Shadal Wendigo card for good luck. So that was definitely pretty awesome, letting me borrow all that stuff. So in this video I want to do first a deck profile, discuss some of my card choices and how they worked for me at the tournament, and then I'm going to follow that up with round by round each of my opponents and how all of those matches went. So for the monsters, I am playing 3 of each of these 4 monsters. That's really basic, pretty much every Volcanic deck does it, and there's really not any good reason to run anything less than maxed out of all of those 4 cards. They're all really important, and the deck wouldn't work as well without all 4 of those cards at maximum copies. And the only other real monster I'm running is a card D. So with this, I kind of wanted to bump up my monster count. Early turn plays, you basically have Rocket, and that's it, because you don't want to summon your Firestorm guards unless you're going to get the effect, or you are forced to summon it. And you basically almost never summon Scattershot or Shell. Sometimes you'll set the Shell as a bluff if you don't have a reload. So some of the other monsters that people run into the card D are the hands. I don't really like them in the main deck because there are some matchups that they're not good against. I don't really like them game 1 against Nekroz, though I do actually like the hands game 2 and 3 against Nekroz because they usually side in Decrees and Denkos if they don't main deck Denko. The other card that's really popular to main deck is Summoner Monk, which I actually think is kind of terrible right now. Effect Negation is really popular right now. Valor, Fiendish, and also Breakthrough Skill are all really popular cards. Basically every deck is playing them and multiple copies of them. Even the Nekroz decks that I was playing against were playing Effect Negation traps, and they weren't playing any other traps in the main besides that. Most commonly Effect Valor, but one of the Nekroz players actually main deck Breakthrough Skill. And Effect Negation really hurts Summoner Monk, much more so than it does any of these normal summon monsters. Usually you can shrug off Effect Negation to Rocket especially. Usually you don't mind your Rocket effects getting negated. And even when Monk goes off, it doesn't really do too much for the deck. So the main thing it does is it lets you search for a reload essentially, but you're playing 3 copies of Rocket and 3 copies of reload. And with the massive amount of draw power this deck has, you can draw into your reload or search into your reload really easily. And you have it almost every game. Oftentimes in multiples. And past that, really the only thing Monk does is it makes rank 4 monsters, which are largely unnecessary in this deck. You hardly ever use the extra deck, and it's really not important. So considering I didn't want to play the hands or Monk, I went with card D as a way of early game I can use this, get a quick +1, and dig deeper into my deck for my combo pieces. I'm only playing 1 copy because I definitely do not want to draw multiples of card D. It's not very good. And then I'm playing 2 copies of Effect Valor. Effect Valor is really, really good right now. The 2 main things that Effect Valor hits are Trishula and Denko Sekka. You obviously can't let Trishula resolve. I only let Trishula resolve its effect once during the entire tournament, which is pretty good considering I had, 11 individual games against Nekroz. So 1 out of 11 games is pretty good in my opinion. And Denko is also everywhere right now. Nekroz and Shadals are the 2 main decks that play it. Shadals a lot of times will end up siding Denko now because it's harder to main deck it with Nekroz around. But Effect Valor is really good because you can just turn Denko off and then use your traps to deal with it. And Effect Valor is good against pretty much every deck right now, so I really like Effect Valor this format right now. Then I'm playing Triple Duality. Duality is pretty obvious. At 3, there's not really any downsides. Sometimes you will draw multiples because you draw so many cards, but those games you're already winning, so it doesn't really matter too much that you have one dead card in your hand. Consistency boosting is good. Triple planter, I actually somewhat disliked the third planter at the tournament. In my testing, it was really good, but at the tournament, I dead drew Magic Planter a lot more than I ever had previously. Part of the problem was Nekroz was siding in so many copies of MST and Twister, so it was hard to keep a continuous trap face up on the field, which was actually a separate issue just because they kept MSTing my iron walls. So I would definitely recommend, at the very least, siding out the third copy against Nekroz, and since Nekroz is the best deck, I would consider only maining 2. So that's an option to change with this deck. Then I'm playing 1 Wildfire. Wildfire is amazing. A quick play Dark Hole is just insanely good. Being able to nuke the field during your opponent's battle phase, in addition to the main phase using reload. A lot of times it'll catch people off guard because it's not during the main phase. You can also use Wildfire to dodge effects, basically. So if you use Royal Firestorm guards and your opponent tries to say Veiler it, you can chain Wildfire to destroy your Royal Firestorm guards, and then its effect will resolve because it's no longer on the field. As good as Wildfire is, I would not recommend playing more than 1 copy, simply because there aren't enough reloads to sustain that. You would end up dead drawing it if you played more than 1. I'm playing Book. Book is pretty self-explanatory, one of the best traps. I don't like it too much against Nekroz, but it's not bad against them. I do side it out in that matchup. And then 1 Regeki. Regeki is the most borderline card aside from the 3rd Magic Planter. I decided to play it mostly because it's an out to Denko Seka. I didn't really draw it too much at the tournament. Regeki is alright. You do have a lot of ways of destroying your opponent's monsters already without this because it's so easy to use Scattershot, and you also have Wildfire. The nice thing about Regeki, though, is it's not reliant on getting a reload active, so if your opponent is preventing you from doing that with Denko Seka, then you can just use Regeki from your hand. So that's the main benefit there. Triple reload, really obvious. This ties the whole deck together. Wouldn't work without this. This card is just really good, providing both draw power and Regekis on your opponent's turn, which is the main benefit of this deck in my opinion. Triple Mind Crush. Mind Crush was actually weaker at the tournament than it had been in the past. I think this is because my opponents were all such good players that they were playing around Mind Crush much better than most people would. For example, there was one time where the only card I knew in my opponent's hand was a Shuret, and then they activated a Nekroz Mirror, and I couldn't call the Shuret because they would just banish it from their graveyard to resolve the Nekroz Mirror. So I didn't have a way of stopping the Ritual Summon without just guessing which Nekroz monster they had in their hand. So there's a lot of times like that where my opponents played it around Mind Crush. They didn't fall for the easy play where they try to summon Unicorn off of Kaleidoscope and you just call a Unicorn. That's the easiest way to get a Mind Crush off, but nobody actually fell for that. Still, Mind Crush was pretty good, and I can't see myself cutting it because there are not very many traps that are actually good against the Nekroz matchup, and Mind Crush is still pretty solid. When I'm playing Triple Fiendish Chain, it's pretty obvious because it's a continuous trap. It stops attacks, which is a nice benefit, but not too important, and it negates effects, and negating effects is really important right now. So Fiendish Chain was pretty great all weekend. And then Triple Reckless Greed, another pretty obvious card in this deck. You have so much draw power in this deck that it's really easy to get multiple copies of Reckless Greed in your hand at the same time, and the card is just broken when you do that. There was one point at the tournament where I resolved all 3 in one turn, which, needless to say, leads to a win. So yeah, Reckless Greed is a must in Volcanics. Then I'm playing 2 Karma Cut. This isn't the most common choice in Volcanics, but I think it's pretty awesome in the deck. So I've elected to play this over the one of traps, essentially, those being Warning, Compulse, Bottomless, and Torrential. The only thing that those 4 have going for them is Warning, can negate the summon of Denko Sekka. In almost every other situation, I would prefer Karma Cut over any of those, because Karma Cut banishes the monster without destroying it, which is an effective way of dealing with almost any monster in the game. The 4 limited traps all have downsides against a lot of cards. So Compulse, for example, is the only other one that doesn't destroy. But against Nekroz, you're putting the cards back in their hand, which against that deck basically means they can just reuse them. Karma Cut is also especially good against decks like Burning Abyss and Shadal's. Burning Abyss, the fact that it banishes all the cards in the grave means that you can potentially get rid of all of your opponent's Dantes or Sirs, which stops one of the deck's strongest plays. And against Shadal's, this is the best answer to Winda, which the deck makes a lot to try to deal with Volcanic's destruction effects. This is the main out to Winda, aside from effect negation in the form of Fiendish Chain and effect failure. In terms of the discard cost, it's essentially negligible. This deck almost always has extra cards in your hand just because you're drawing so much. So usually you have a card that's not particularly useful in your current situation, you can just discard it and not even care. Even past that, there are 2 different cards that you can basically discard for free. You can discard an extra reload from your hand and then just use its engrave effect to replace itself, essentially by using Scattershot's effect. And you do end up with extra reloads a lot because you can draw into any of them and then search for extra copies from Rocket. So you usually do have more than 1 copy of reload. Additionally, if you don't have any reloads, Shell is a free discard for Karma Cut, because you can just discard Shell and then replace it with another copy of itself on your next turn. And then to finish out the deck, I'm playing 1 Vanities and 1 Ring, 2 really strong traps. I actually did not draw Vanities all weekend, which really hurt me with how much I played against Nekroz. I don't know how that happened, I just got really unlucky there. Vanities is one of the best cards in the deck though, so no good reason not to play it. And then I did draw Ring a lot, and Ring was really good. The burn damage in conjunction with Scattershot is pretty huge. There was one game where I burned a Nekroz player for 3,300 damage with his Decisive Armor, and then finished him off with Scattershot's 1,500. So the versatility on Ring is just amazing. So then onto the side deck. I'm running an extremely generic side deck, which I really like right now. Every single card in my side deck is useful for multiple matchups, which definitely helps the flexibility there. So I am citing 3 MSTs. I should probably address why I'm not main decking it. I feel like in Volcanics, main deck MST is actually kind of terrible right now. There's only 2 reasons I would ever want to have MST in this deck. The first one is I'm playing against Cliffords, but this deck is much less popular than it used to be, and I luckily did not play against it at the YCS. If I did, game 1 is honestly a struggle even if I do play MSTs. So I didn't want to sacrifice my other matchups, especially against Nekroz, where MST is pretty dead game 1, just to have a better Clipboard matchup. The other situation where I want to have MST is if my opponent is using a Floodgate that actually hurts my deck. There are not very many that do that. The main 2 that come to mind are Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos. The only decks that can realistically main deck them is Ritual Beasts and Yosenjus, 2 less popular decks that I can honestly crush with my Volcanics. Either I'm going to beat them game 1 because they don't draw those cards, or they draw those cards game 1, and then I beat them game 2 and 3. I was not worried at all about those matchups, so it was not worth main decking MST for those either. In other situations, it's basically just like a 1-for-1, and I really don't care about most traps. Effect negation hurts me a little bit, but other types of traps, like Bottomless or Mirror Force, do not phase this deck at all. You can just like crash right through them, and it doesn't matter. Your monsters, Rocket and Firestorm Guards, get pluses on summon, so if your opponent is not negating the effect, they're not stopping your engine. And even if they do negate the effect, they just slow you down really. Your opponent is still taking a -1 or 1-for-1 depending on what they use to stop your effect. So while I do like MST in the side, especially for Cliffords, and I put this in for things like Satellite Knights 2. Don't think it should be in the main. I did put it in against Masked Heroes at the YCS, but that was the only matchup where he came up, and I only put 2 in for that. And then next I'm playing 2 Rivalry of Warlords. The main reason these are here is for Burning Abyss, which I did not play against. Against Burning Abyss, the deck basically can't play with Rivalry up. The only monster they can summon is Tempo, which is basically a 1700 vanilla. I did side in 1 against Shadal's. It's not amazing against Shadal's, but it's decent. So if they have Denko, they can choose to summon Denko to turn off your traps, but then they can no longer summon any other monsters because Denko's a Thunder. If they choose not to summon Denko and instead go with their spellcasters, they are limited to only summoning Winda. If they don't have any monsters on the field, then they can summon Construct, but Construct is a fairy. So it makes plays pretty awkward for Shadal's. I only side in 1 for that matchup though, because I don't want to draw 2. It's not useful enough that I would want it in multiples in that matchup. It's also really good against a lot of rogue matchups, like this completely destroys Spirit Beast. And then triple Iron Wall, I sided this in all 3 copies almost every match because I played against 4 Nekroz and 2 Masked Heroes. I actually strongly considered main decking this. This is the card that was closest to main decking besides the ones that are actually up in here. I was a little hesitant to do so because it obviously conflicts with Karma Cut, which I really enjoy playing. However, Imperial Iron Wall basically gets you the win by itself against Nekroz, assuming they don't destroy with MST. But that is a problem in that matchup. They do like destroying this with MST, which makes the matchup very difficult. Still, it's a pretty obvious inclusion, and when it works amazing. And I'm running 3 Maxi. This is once again mostly for Burning Abyss. I do like it though because you can also use it effectively against rogue matchups like Sylvans or Fire Fist, and it's also pretty decent against Satellite Knights and Shadal's. They're not amazing in those matchups. I don't really like siding this in against Nekroz, so I don't. The only time I used this all weekend was against the Shadal matchup. I put in 2 copies, and it was pretty good actually. And then for the last spot, I played 2 Firehand and 2 Ice Hand. Probably these are up there with Imperial Iron Wall in terms of the most important cards on the side. The main thing is these are amazing against the Cliffort matchup, which is a really tough matchup. You really want to have the hands when you're going up against that deck. Additionally, these are also actually really good sides against Nekroz, surprisingly. The idea for this, I have to give credit to Doug Zeef for suggesting the idea of siding in 2 Fire Hands as an answer to Denko Sekka. I tried it out and it works really well, but I decided to also side in 1 Ice Hand alongside it because so many Nekroz players are now siding in Decree. Ice Hand is probably the best out to Decree because you don't really want to put in MSTs against that matchup because aside from Decree, MST is pretty useless there. Ice Hand, however, has the benefit of working nicely in conjunction with Fire Hand and at least being a beat stick even if they don't have the Decree. And I have to say, putting the 2 of them in together against Nekroz was really good at the tournament. They helped a lot. And I saw Decree enough that I actually, partially through the tournament, I decided that it was correct to start siding in all 4 copies against Nekroz. Because basically, every single Nekroz player you can expect to be siding in both Denko and Decree if they don't have Denko main decked. And then the extra deck is not really very important. I used it like 5 times, I think, at the tournament total, which is actually a lot for 7 rounds of games. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of the extra deck because it just comes up so rarely that there are very few that are critical. There's a few that I want to talk about specifically though, and I'll also point out the ones that I actually summon. So first of all, I do play Ghost Trick Dullahan. Most Volcanic players I have seen do not play Dullahan, and I do not understand why. It's not a space issue because you have so much room in the extra deck, and Dullahan is actually pretty amazing. It's very situational, but it's great to have when that situation comes up. So specifically, what happens sometimes is you'll have a shell in your graveyard with no reload. This can happen for a number of reasons. It could be your opponent used an MST on it, you used a Wildfire or Magic Planner on it. So you have 2 free searches with the shell. You can get obviously only once per turn, but you have 2 monsters in your deck that you can search basically for free card advantage wise. You're only paying life points. So on your first turn, you'll search shell, and then you'll set it, and if it happens to survive, which sometimes it does, on your next turn you can search your second shell, and all you do is you just normal summon shell, and you flip summon the first one, and then you make Dullahan. So you just paid 1,000 life points to summon Dullahan. And this play is actually really good because Dullahan's effect is pretty good. By itself, it can get over any monster that's 2,400 or less, and with your beat sticks, you can get over 3,800 or less with Rocket, and then Firestorm Guards is 34 or less. So you can get over almost anything with Dullahan. And like I said earlier, it costs you no card advantage to summon Dullahan. I've only summoned him twice, but I do not see enough people playing this. And one of those 2 times that I've ever summoned it was actually at the YCS, and it put in a lot of work against Nekroz. Basically just being a beat stick. And then most of the other Xyzs are pretty self-explanatory. They're just generic rank 4s. I did not summon Abyss Dweller. I did not summon Castel either. I am playing 2 Castels. I want to talk about that a little bit. I do not have MSTs in my main deck, so that means if my opponent is playing the Floodgates, I don't expect to see game 1 like Macrocosmos. Castel is pretty much my only out to that, unless I can pull off an Exciton. So I wanted to make sure that in case something happened to the first one, I would be able to summon the second one. I figured, why not? I have the room for it. Obviously, it did come up. Even summoning 1 didn't come up. I did not summon Emerald. I did summon Dark Rebellion Dragon once. I like this against Nekroz because you can attack over Unicorn. And additionally, if you get its effect off, and then your opponent later summons Unicorn, you'll still keep the attack boost. So it's pretty good just as a beat stick, pretty much. I did not summon Exciton. I did summon Cowboy once. I had a read on my opponent's card. I was basically just baiting out their trap, and I had game the next turn anyways, so it didn't really matter that I summoned Cowboy, but I did summon it technically. I did not use Lavolval Chain. Sorry, Gustavo. I did summon Honor Arc once. It won me the game, but I also would have won the game if I had summoned Heartland Draco, Dark Rebellion, or Castel. All 4 of those cards would have worked in the situation. I just went with 1-1 because it was the safest, but yeah. It worked at least. I did not summon Ragnar Zero. I did not summon Heartland Draco. I did summon Diamond Crab King. So the situation was I knew my opponent had a Mass Change set, and they had an Anki I had to get over, so it's 2,800 attack. If I would have targeted it with 101 or Castel, they would have just Mass Changed it away and replaced it with another Anki or Darklaw. So basically I just went as a Crab King so I could get over it, and even if he Mass Changed it, I would have been able to get over whatever he summoned next. So Diamond Crab King was pretty much the perfect out in that situation. This is also, by the way, an out to towers if that comes up. So I like having it just in case. But I didn't play against Clipboards, obviously. And then I am playing actually level 5 Synchros. I figured why not? If you're playing something where Veiler is dead, you can just normal summon it and go into these to get some use out of the Veiler. They're not that amazing, but they're not that bad either. And there's not really any other rank 4s that I need, so they're in there. I didn't summon them. So in the tournament in round 1, I ended up getting paired against Masked Heroes, and game 1 my opponent made a big push, and he ended up making a field with Darklaw, Acid, and Shining on it. I had to use Fiendish when he summoned Acid to stop him from destroying all my traps, and then I was able to use Karma Cut and Regeki to clear his board and not lose. Though I was pretty low on life points at this point. I had 2,400 life points, but after I cleared his board, I was able to get my engine going, and once I had my engine running, I rolled on to an easy win. He paid 4,000 life points for Hero Lives, making his board, which made it a bit easier because Scattershot took a big chunk of his life points out. Game 2, he went first, which actually makes me think of something. You should almost always go second with Volcanics, especially because you always want to go second against Nekroz, and that's the most common matchup. And you also definitely want to go second against Shadal's and against the Mirror. The only matchups where I would consider going first are Burning Abyss, Satellar Knights, and Clifflords. But even against those, it's borderline. Having the extra card definitely helps, and there's not really anything that you want to set up turn 1 that makes it really important to go before your opponent. But back to round 1. So game 2, my opponent went first, and on my first turn, he had 2 Mind Crushes set. So he hit the Imperial Iron Wall. I searched off a Duality and then a Regeki out of my hand. And after that, I didn't really have a defense for his plays, and he OTK'd me on his second turn. And then game 3, Wildfire put in a lot of work clearing his board and also putting Reload in the grave. Up to this point, I had purposefully avoided using the in-grave reload effect because my opponent pretty clearly was a little unfamiliar with the Volcanic deck, so I knew I would catch him off guard, and I did. And then when he was really low on life points, a Ring of Destruction on his Dark Law put him down to 350 life points, which put him in range for an easy finish after that. So I won my first round against Masked Hero, and then round 2 I ended up getting paired up against Masked Hero again. This kid actually was the kid who won the Dragon Duel championship later on that weekend. He was pretty clearly a good player, especially for someone so young. So game 1, he goes for a Summoner Monk play. He went first. I think I let him go first. And I had a Veiler in hand for that. So he tries to salvage the situation by summoning Bubble Man to make a 1/1. But I use Phoenix Chain to negate 1/1's effect, and then I use Reload plus Scatter Shot to kill the 1/1. And he put so many resources into making that monster that I was able to easily win after that. Game 2, he makes a first turn 1/1 again, which, I mean, 1/1 isn't really a bad monster to summon against Volcanics, because the main way that the Volcanic deck clears monsters usually is through destruction. And this time he didn't lose quite as much card advantage because I didn't have a Veiler for his Monk. But I just so happened to have the exact same out the second game, Fiendish Chain plus Reload Scattershot. And then the fact that I had an Imperial Iron Wall set afterwards led to a pretty easy win. He tried to follow up my Scattershot play with a Miracle Fusion, but I just chained my Imperial Iron Wall to prevent it from resolving. At the end of this game, I was actually up like 10 cards in card advantage. And then round 3, I got paired up against Nekroz. This guy actually made top 32 later in the event, so definitely a good player. Game 1, I drew no ways to stop his Trishula play, and he got that off successfully. This was the only time that I actually had Trishula's effect resolve against me during the whole tournament, but I got blown out because it did, and he did actually banish my Scattershot that game. Game 2 was a little weird. So I summon a Volcanic Rocket on my first turn. Obviously I went second because I lost game 1. So he used his set Breakthrough skill to negate my Rocket's effect. I just attacked for 1900, set some traps past. He then passed back to me without making any plays. I then summoned my second Rocket, and he scooped immediately when I did that. So he must have just had a terrible hand, because he scooped just from summoning 2 Volcanic Rockets. Like, I didn't even activate like an Imperial Iron Wall or anything like that. He just didn't have anything. So then game 3, I drew into a lot of good traps, plus I had a Fire Hand in my hand, in case he had Denko. So I felt like I was in a pretty good position, but like an idiot, I forgot to activate Imperial Iron Wall and Blazing Later Reload during my opponent's standby phase. So during his main phase, he summoned Denko, and I couldn't stop any of his plays that turn. Luckily, I was able to recover because I could just crash my fire hand into his Denko, and then with my traps now being able to go back online, I can activate my Imperial Iron Wall and my Blaze Accelerator reload, and I controlled the game from there. He didn't manage to draw an out to my Imperial Iron Wall, so I ended up heavily up in card advantage. So I won that last game pretty handedly. So at this point I'm 3-0, and I'm in a pretty good position. Round 4, I get paired up against Nekroz again. This time I'm at table 1, and I'm playing against another really good player. This is another guy who made top 32 with Nekroz. So game 1, I am able to stop his Trish effect from resolving, but he manages to out advantage me, and I can't keep up with his card advantage, so he just wins that game pretty handedly. So game 2, I continuously use my Royal Firestorm guards to basically cycle through scatter shots on my turn. I'll nuke his field on my turn, do 1500 damage, and then I'll put them back in my deck and then attack for 17 with Royal Firestorm guards. And this way I'm not open to Trishula. And I get him really low. He's down to 1600 life points, and I have 2 Mind Crushes set, but he normal summons Denko Sekka, so I can't activate my 2 Mind Crushes, and he manages to put me down to 300 life points. So I'm just barely alive. I do have a Fire Hand, so I don't have enough life points to crash it really, so I set it, and he attacks into it with his Valkyrus, so I can use the effect to pop his Denko Sekka, and then I summon an Ice Hand from my deck, and then on my next turn, I normal summon my in-hand Fire Hand, and I put the Fire and Ice Hand together to make 101 to absorb his Valkyrus on the field, and then I use Mind Crush to call Valkyrus because I know he has one in hand, and then I just attack for game. And then game 3, I brick a really bad hand. The only thing I really have going for me is I have Imperial Iron Wall, which keeps me in the game because my opponent can't really generate too much card advantage, but I don't really have anything else going for me. And he has a breakthrough skill to stop my Volcanic Rocket Search, and that really kills me. I can't recover from that, and I lose on the next turn without being able to use reload effect. This match, my opponent was playing both Valor and Breakthrough Skill in the main deck, which hurt me the entire match, especially when he was hitting my Royal Firestorm guards. There was once where I had to use my Wildfire to destroy my own monster to dodge his effect Valor. So unfortunately I lost that, and that puts me down to 3-1. And then round 5, for the 3rd round in a row, I get paired up against a Nekroz player who ends up making top 32. This guy actually happens to be the guy who just won YCS Seattle and is about to get 2nd place at YCS Chicago, so a little bit of a ridiculous matchup. So game 1, he summons a Denko Sekka, and I just don't have any outs, and he OTKs me. And then game 2, I have an Imperial Iron Wall, which allows me to play like my hands as beat sticks basically that float, and I get my opponent really low on life points. He then summons Brionic plus a Dweller, and he's obviously trying to attack over the hands, but I Valor his Dweller. So instead of attacking, he just passes back to me, and so I normal summon a monster alongside my 2 hands, and then I keep my Fire Hand on the field, and I put the other 2 monsters together to make a Dark Rebellion Exy Dragon. And I pump that up to, I believe, 3650 attack, something really high, and I take out his entire field, which puts him down to 1000 life points. But on his next turn, he has a decree which he uses to turn off Imperial Iron Wall, and he OTKs on that turn. I go from 8000 to 0. So I just lost 2 matches in a row to really strong Nekroz players, which is too bad, and I'm down to 3-2, so I can't lose another match basically for the rest of the tournament. The next round I get paired up against Shadal's, which is pretty lucky for me because Shadal's is, in my opinion, one of the easiest matchups. The only 2 scary things in the matchup are Denko Sekka and OTKs. If the Shadal deck doesn't OTK you, you basically have a really easy time winning. You can just outgrind the Shadal deck. They can't keep up with Volcanics in the long run. So game 1, I don't think my opponent was totally sure what I was playing because he ended up summoning 3 Squamata. I was taking the game a little bit slowly as I was trying to get some plays together, and so he ended up normal summoning all 3 of them on 3 subsequent turns. And then I just used Scatter Shot to take out all 3, and only one of them is able to activate its effect, and that led to a really easy win for me because that was such a big swing in both card advantage and momentum. Game 2, I couldn't really get anything going the entire game, and he just used beatdown, really, just normal summoning his monsters and attacking, and I didn't really draw any answers. In game 3, I just did what Volcanics do best, and I just grinded and grinded, and I ended up winning with 3 separate scattershot burns for 1500 damage each. And by the time this game was over, I had just massive card advantage. Like another game, I was plus 10ish. That's just what happens with Volcanics usually when the games go long enough. Window was a constant presence this entire match, just because its effect is pretty solid against Volcanics. But I was able to always have a Veiler, a Fiendish Chain, or a Karma Cut to get rid of it, so I didn't have any issues dealing with Winda. So at this point, I'm 4-2. Not too bad, but I have to keep winning if I want to keep going. And then round 7, I get paired up against Nekroz once again. So game 1, I have a really good steady stream of traps, and I actually managed to run him completely out of Nekroz spells and monsters. And he only has 1 Nekroz spell still in his deck, so he's almost completely out of steam. And I ended up winning due to burn from Ring plus Scattershot. This is the game where I use my Ring to burn my opponent for 3300 damage by hitting his decisive armor. Game 2, like my earlier match, I use Royal Firestorm Guards and Scattershot on my turn to clear my opponent's board and push for damage. And I end up actually with a significant amount of card advantage, but I have the worst hand. I end up drawing into a hand of 2 shells, 2 hands, 1 fire and 1 ice, and 2 magic planners with absolutely no traps. So basically all I can do in this position is normal summon one of the hands, which doesn't cut it, and my opponent is able to easily win even though I have basically double the amount of cards he has at that point. Game 3, I go second, but I don't really have too many plays. I do have a Fiendish Chain and Imperial Iron Wall, and I set both of them. Unfortunately, my opponent decided to go YOLO. He end-phase spaced both of them, hoping that I did not have a reload set, which unfortunately I did not. And then on his second turn, he OTKs me. So that's it for me in the tournament. I'm down 4-3, and considering it's like 7 o'clock at this point, I decided to just go home instead of playing the last 2 rounds, I think. I think there's 2 more rounds that day. But I still think it was a pretty successful day, and I had a pretty good time. One of my friends at this point was actually still 5-2, so he was still in it, and he ended up making top 32 with Stellar Knights. So if you're listening to the video, nice job, Lewis. One last thing I kind of want to mention: when you're at a YCS, there's always people stealing cards and stuff. You hear about it all the time, but it seemed like a lot, like way more than usual this time. 2 guys from my locals both had their stuff stolen, which is, I mean, it sucks. And then when I was sitting out in the hallway, there's another guy who was like, just sitting next to me, and he had his stuff stolen too. I mean, and that's just a really scumbag thing to do. If any of you guys are going to a big event, the one thing I do is I like loop my backpack around my leg when I'm sitting, so it's basically you can't steal it without pulling my leg, and I'm gonna notice somebody trying to pull on my leg, hopefully at least. And that's worked for me so far. I also saw a lot of famous YouTube personalities. You always see a lot at events like this, but just way more than usual. Basically everyone you can think of. I saw Patrick Hoban, Jeff Jones, Billy Brake, Fraser Smith, MCole40, Vexicus, and that's just off the top of my head. There's like you could look every which way and just see like people that you recognized. So that was pretty cool. Anyways, I didn't manage to make top 2, but I had a pretty successful experience. I had a lot of fun. And hopefully all of you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to check out some of my other stuff.